benefit from hearing your story and how you transitioned from being studying with this international relations and then to becoming a journalist and then to becoming a spokesperson. So can you tell us more about your transition from your studies and to where you are now?
Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to address the students of TUT. I want to wish you all luck as you write your exams. I hope that you do well and that you're able to remain focused and that you're able to achieve the goals that you set out for yourselves. My journey into journalism was not a direct path. I did not set out to be a journalist. When I started as a student at Wits University in 1999, I began with the desire of becoming a lawyer. So I registered an LLB, and for the first year, that's what I did. I hated it. The second year, I changed to a BA in Politics and International Relations. And really, it was in the second year that my student life really came to life. In that year, I was also campaigning at Wits University to be part of the SRC. We were part of a group of students known as the Independent Students Association. Our role at that time was to try and to counter the hegemony of the ANC and SASCO on campus at Wits. It was a very interesting roller coaster ride. It was my first foray into politics and student politics in particular. And that whole process culminated in me becoming, we did well that year, and I was one of those who was elected to SRC, and I became education officer. Anyway, long story short, it was really that kind of work as an education officer where I was exposed to the brutality of the readmissions system, where students find themselves academically and financially excluded. I think that more than anything had a major impact on my ideas on politics and also on the way society needed to change. At that time, I myself was also going through severe financial struggles, and I ended up dropping out of Wits University at that time because I had to work in order to support my family. So the work that I found in the first couple of years, I did a lot of work in HR. I started really at the bottom, in call center. I worked my way up until eventually I was working in HR and in recruitment. And in 2009, I got retrenched. And I wasn't really liking the work I was doing anyway. So I had a major career shift. I was 29 at the time, and I thought, well, I could either carry on doing the thing that I didn't really like, or I could go and pursue what I was really interested in, which was news and current affairs. And I joined a community radio station called Radio Today in Johannesburg. And from there, I worked, and while I was working there, I managed to get spotted, if I can put it that way, by TUT FM. I worked for them in their traffic department, and from there the rest is history, because I went from Kaya to 702 to ENCA, and then eventually to what I'm doing now. But if I'm honest, I think a lot of my work, and particularly the stories that I focused on, prepared me particularly for the work that I'm doing now, representing 350,000 metal workers in South Africa, the NUMSA, the trade union that I speak for.
All right, I was about to ask you how your work, how your studies and your journey into journalism now prepared you for the job that you're doing now. So you already answered that. And I feel it's very important that we had this kind of question on air, because we've been talking a lot in the studio about how is education really the key to success, and you know what happens now when you have to have a plan B, and does it work out? So in answering that question, would you say that education is the key to success?
Absolutely. You know, the thing about education is, in spite of whatever it is that you decide to study, because it's a fact that most of us never end up in the career that we studied for. What education does is it gives you a sense of confidence. It makes you, it really positions you in the world so that you can knock on whichever door that you wish to knock on with regards to a career that you have a desire to enter into. That's really the thing that education does, is it gives you a great deal of knowledge, a great deal of confidence. It allows prospective employers to have faith in the sense that, you know, this person has studied some kind of vocation. We can give them a level of responsibility in the workplace so that they can work their way into whatever it is that you envision yourself to be in the future. The best advice I would give to young people today is don't be married to the idea of what you think you want to be for the rest of your life. Because once you get first-hand experience of what it is that you want to pursue, it may not necessarily live up to your expectations. So you must be open and you must be flexible into trying different things. Be open to exploring different career paths. And particularly if you consider the way that the world is changing, the way technology, for example, has advanced so much, the kind of worker who is going to be able to survive this new society is the kind of worker who is flexible, who is quick on his or her feet, who is adaptable with technology. And as you know, whatever it is that you're studying now may not necessarily match up to the technology that's out there, you know. So really, the best advice I can give young people is be open-minded with whatever it is you're studying, mentally prepare yourself for the possibility that you will change your career, and it's not the end of the world if you do that.
Very awesome. So can you please tell us more about your job as a spokesperson? What does it entail?
Well, my role as a spokesperson at NUMSA is ultimately I'm responsible for communication on behalf of the trade union nationally. I'm also responsible for protecting the image of the trade union, so how it's perceived by the public, how it's reported on, and also the communication that we deliver to the public. I'm responsible for that. And I'm also responsible for the strategic direction, if I can put it that way, of our communication strategy, for drafting it and for implementing it as well. But in drafting it, I don't do so in isolation. I work very closely with the leadership, particularly in the office of the General Secretary. And he's the person that I answer to on a day-to-day basis in terms of my responsibilities. But really, the job of a spokesperson is to make sure that the greater community of South Africa knows what NUMSA is, what NUMSA's values are, and what we stand for.
All right. Speaking of NUMSA, we've been like calling you every Monday, I think, from when I started this show. So can you give us maybe like your top 3 most memorable endeavors as NUMSA for 2017?
Top 3 moments definitely would be when the Labour Appeals Court confirmed what we've always known, which is that temporary employees must be employed permanently after 3 months of service. So in other words, that court decision effectively confirmed in our minds that labor brokering is not something that is sustainable, it's not something that should be supported. In fact, according to the courts, that arrangement is something that should only be temporary and last for 3 months. Thereafter, all employees must be absorbed into the main workforce as permanent employees. And for us, that is a major victory. We've been fighting the battle of labor brokers for a very long time. Unfortunately, this government has ignored the voice of the working class when it comes to this issue. And it was very important for NUMSA to seek that clarity from the Labour Appeals Court. But more importantly, it was important for us to get that decision, which was going to confirm the rights of workers who find themselves in as temporary workers. So certainly that was definitely a highlight. certainly another issue that I think that stands out in my mind is that this year has been a celebration of NUMSA's 30th birthday. It's a significant milestone for us as a trade union. It's significant that we're a trade union that can speak about the fact that we've been in existence since we were partly involved in the liberation movement, but also we were partly involved as a trade union in really shaping the scope of labor in this country. And whilst we're aware of, what the problems are with the labor movement broadly in South Africa, and of course we're very much part of that story, for us it's hugely significant that we can actually say after 30 years we remain a militant, worker control, independent trade union, in light of the fact that you have trade union federations like COSATU, which sadly have given up worker control for the sake of political expediency. For us as NUMSA, it's very important that from the time of our formation to 30 years into the present, we are still true to our values as a worker-controlled trade union, as a powerful workers' movement in the South African labor space. I think if I also have to talk about highlights, I don't want to speak particularly about one thing in particular, but broadly about the battles we fought in state-owned entities, particularly at SAA, at Road Accident Fund, at Transnet, even in the bus passenger sector, some of the victories that we had in the strike there, where we managed to secure a 9% wage increase, which was for the first time in that particular sector where that significant increase was achieved. So really, what I can say as the final highlight for the year is the fact that we've really done a very good job of communicating NUMSA as a militant trade union, as a trade union which cares about workers. You can Google us for any story, and what you will find is NUMSA always fighting on behalf of workers and their families to try and improve their conditions. And that speaks directly to who we are as a trade union. And I would definitely say that that's one of our achievements for the year.
And speaking of celebrations, another thing that NUMSA was celebrating is the 100th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Now, when we spoke about this, so when we had a telephonic interview, a lot of people were asking me, but why a Russian Revolution? What? People that really don't get the history behind that. Can you please tell us what lessons can we as a South African working class learn from the Russian Revolution?
There's a lot of lessons we can learn from the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution is important because, primarily because it is the first proper example that we have as the working class of what is possible when members of the working class are united. 100 years ago, in November, in the modern calendar, Russian workers united with soldiers and they united with the peasantry to fight against the oppressive Tsarist system, which in that time was sort of like the kings and queens of that time. This system was extremely oppressive. It really meant that members of the working class had absolutely no rights. I mean, when we're talking about a labor regime in South Africa, we're talking about the existence of the labor law, we're talking about the CCMA, for example, where people can go to air their grievances. We're talking about all kinds of measures in place to protect workers. In Russia, there was no such thing. You were just exploited. You would earn whatever you were was being paid to you. You could get fired on the spot. You were exposed to horrific sweatshop working conditions, and workers had no platform and no power in order to exercise and demand better for themselves and for their families. And what was achieved through the Bolshevik Revolution, which was led by Vladimir Lenin, was effectively what Lenin did was he united members of the working class around three common ideals: bread, peace, land. Bread was the demand of the peasantry, bread was the demand of the working class, who were really suffering under extremely high food prices, and they wanted bread in order to survive. Land was the demand of the peasantry, who were suffering under the feudal system, And of course, peace was the demand of the Russian soldiers, who at that time were frustrated by the lengthy First World War, which was taking a very negative toll on them. And what took place at that time was that the Russian working class actually succeeded. At the time when the Bolsheviks marched onto the capital at that time and took over and took control of the Russian legislature, what they achieved in taking over was they achieved a true form of radical economic transformation. The Russian society was transformed in the interest of the working class. What that means in ordinary terms is that an ordinary worker suddenly had the same status as the chairperson of a CEO or a chairman of a multinational global firm in modern day terms. That's what it meant. They were in charge of the economy. They were in charge of society. They were in charge of government. So they had equal status. Women, for the first time, were free, were equal with men under this new system. Even gay people were free and had equal status under this new system. This was 100 years ago. So why are we celebrated in South Africa? Well, because it's really important that the South African working class must unite. We are faced with critical challenges. We are faced with the challenge of extremely high unemployment, with extremely high poverty levels and extremely high inequality. These are a byproduct of the capitalist system which has been in place for over 2 decades in this country, and the compromises that were made at the negotiated settlement. And in order for us to truly transform the society so that the majority of people, which are the working class and who are African, then we need to be united with these goals in mind. We need to demand, for example, free, decolonized, quality education for everybody. We need to demand the land. We want the land back. We need to demand nationalization of the banks, nationalization of the mines, so that all of the wealth of the country can actually be in the hands of the people and in the control of the working class. And so that's why, for us as NUMSA, noting and marking this significant holiday and this significant achievement of the working class is very important, because it's a reminder of what we can do if we are united with a common vision and a common goal, and if we fight in our own interests.
All right, so some of the highlights from this week that you've had, you started on the 5th of November, right?
Yes, we started on the 5th of November. We went on until yesterday, actually, because our celebrations merged with, you know, on Friday, we joined with other left forces, people from, for example, or let's say even those who sympathize with the left, for example, those from the EFF. We also had representation from people from the United Front, as well as organizations like WASP, a few other socialist organizations that all came together to celebrate this moment. And it is particularly important that we must note this, especially now, because the working class in South Africa has never been under attack like it's under attack right now. Our government, for example, is trying to implement a national minimum wage. It's trying to make changes to the labor legislation, which ultimately are going to have a very negative impact on the working class in this country. And it's important that workers everywhere unite, regardless of political affiliation. We must understand what this national minimum wage is. We must understand its implications for us. We must understand the changes that are going to take place in the labor regime and what it means for working class and their families. Because if we don't know these things and if we don't fight against these things, then we are not going to be able to ensure that all the things that we fought so hard for under apartheid are not removed from us. What we are seeing as NUMSA, with the implementation of the national minimum wage as it's being proposed at 20 Rand per hour, as well as the changes in terms of the limitation to the right to strike, what we're seeing as NUMSA is an attempt by this government to roll back on all the rights that workers fought so hard for under apartheid. And we feel it is very important that the working class must understand that these changes are a threat to their very existence.
All right. Another thing that took place during that week, or last week rather, was the book launch of Ronnie Kasril's book. And you know, just before that, we had independent political analyst, Mr. Nzama Madzenga, on the show, and he was saying, you know, such books will have no impact and will bring no change because they just come out and people read about corruption and then nothing is done. What's your opinion on that?
I think, you know, it's very important, first of all, that we must expose corruption at all levels. And in fact, it's the working class who are best placed to do that. It's the working class who do that all the time. It's ordinary workers who are exposed to the way managers loot and the amount of wastage that takes place, whether it's at government SOEs or even at corporations in different parts of the country in South Africa. But the bottom line, it's ordinary workers who know firsthand, first of all, how systems work, and they know when systems are being circumvented by their employers. So I don't think that exposés of this kind should be dismissed. It's important that people must know what's going on. Information is power. Knowledge is power. Members of the working class must know to what extent their tax is being wasted, that their hard-earned money is being abused by the state. But at the same time, it's also important that when we're talking about corruption, the face of corruption must not be one-sided. The narrative, if I'm frank, in the manner in which corruption has been covered in South Africa has been extremely one-sided. The face of corruption, first of all, is often black, and nobody talks about, at least they don't talk in the same extent about corporate corruption. When bread companies get together and manipulate the price and fix the price so that ordinary workers cannot afford bread, then the media calls it collusion. It's corruption. So that is precisely the problem that we have, is that the same amount of focus that's being given to, for example, the Guptas and the Guptarization of the state is not being given to, for example, the kind of looting that takes place when the Ruperts and the Rothschilds of this world are also milking the state for their own selfish purposes, when white monopoly capital milks the state for its own selfish purposes. For us as NUMSA, the face of corruption is capitalism, full stop. So whether it's Pravin Gordhan on the one side and Cyril Ramaphosa versus Jacob Zuma, as far as we're concerned, it's one face of corruption. And it is up to the working class to expose this kind of corruption, because at the end of the day, these policies that are being implemented at the detriment of the working class.
All right. Wow. That was the national spokesperson for NUMSA, the acting national spokesperson for NUMSA, Phakamile Hlubi. And when we come back from this break, we are also going to be having our president, our SRC President, Katlego Makyobola. And we are going to be engaging on some of the issues that, you know, affect you young people out there listening to the show, and the students as well. And we are going to be coming back after this break. Of coming into university, the biggest thing that's happening right now is the fee commission report that just came out today, and there are a lot of changes that are coming with that. And you know, we just want to also give you the information so that your opinions can be cultivated, and when your soul is enriched, then you can make informed decisions about your future. Katlego, welcome.
Good evening to you, the listeners.
And thank you so much for coming to represent also our campus. Yay, yay. So for the people who do not know you, the young people, they're like, who is Katlego? What is SRC? What are his duties? Can you just give us a little bit of information about who you are and what does it mean being our campus's SRC president?
Okay. My name is Katlego Makyobola. I'm the president of TUT Soshanguve and the branch secretary of the Young Communist League of SA TUT branch. I'm going to just summarize the role of SRC in universities. The role of SRC is just to eliminate the gap between students and management by ensuring that the interests of students are represented in boardrooms with management. So that is basically the role of SRC in universities. That's my view, in fact.
I think that's like the most simple, most comprehensive definition that they can ever get. Ne? So since we saw you, when we saw you, you were fresh stepping into your office. How has it been so far? Have you been able to do some things, some changes, the changes that we talked about?
Yes, up to so far we have managed to resolve 2 issues. I'm sure you are aware that we've got beneficiaries of Funza Lushaka in the university. The students have since registered in February, and up to this far, some of them have not got their pocket allowances. So it means that some of them did not have food from February to this far. So we managed to engage stakeholders of the university, and the process was fast-tracked, and eventually the money came in, and some students got it, and some students are still waiting, of which we are still trying to challenge management that if they are saying Funza Lushaka has not released money, they must take money from their pockets, give our students, and then when Funza Lushaka allocate the money to the account of the university, is then they will return it to where they took it. Issue number 2 that we have managed to resolve is the issue of the 24-hour operating library. I'm sure you are also aware, presenter, that we had a problem of the library closing at 12. And statistics have shown that the university can only accommodate 4,000 students, yet it registers 16,000 students. So we've got a lot of students who are staying outside, and when they come to study and you tell them that they must leave at 12 o'clock midnight, then you are indirectly saying that no, Nyope boys and thugs outside, deal with them. So we said that our students must be allowed to study until in the morning, so that they can be safe while going to their rooms. So those are the 2 issues that we have managed to resolve up to this far.
And it's in a space of how many months?
I can say 1 month.
Sure. Wow, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
We can only hope for the best from
Yes.
here onwards.
Yes.
Okay, and one thing that we said we're going to discuss is the fees commission. You know, when the whole free education fees must fall movement came, people were questioning the feasibility of it all. Can we do it? And so they have come up and said the commission has reported that no, the state has no capacity to carry out such a thing. So are you one of the people who are surprised by this, or are you just saying that, well, we saw it was never going to happen?
You see, one of the mistakes that we do as human beings is to take decisions without involving the people who are really affected by the problem. I think what the person who came up with the commission did wrong was to just appoint people who are not even affected by this thing and leave us who are affected. So when they take decisions based on their feelings, their views, and mind you, these people are staying in suburbs, they are staying in nice places. So when they take these decisions, they know that their children are not going to be affected. So they will obviously say that free education is not feasible in South Africa and subject us to loans. That we said as the South African Student Congress, that we are prescribed to the Marxist and Leninist ideology, which is against loans, because maybe I should just share with you how loans were actually formulated. You know, the capitalist or the capitalism economic system has got too much contradictory elements. It is like a snake that bites itself. So we had a situation wherein these capitalists created employment and our people were happy. So now when they were generating a profit, for an example of 100,000, you know how capitalists live, they always want more. So they said, now we are moving from 100,000 to 100,000, and the situation was not allowing them to get that 200,000. So they decided, what do? We cut down the labor force. in our industries. So now we're faced by a situation where they produced more and there was no one to buy because they cut down labor forces in the industry. So they sat down and decided, because they are strategists, these people, they are very intelligent. They sat down and said, no, it's fine. Now that we have retrenched them, we must just ensure that they buy without having money and paying later. So in my view, the government is again trying to say that we are still going to retrench your parents, and they are not. We know that they are not going to afford to pay for your fees. So here is a loan, and that some of our parents cannot even afford, because if I am being supported by my grandmother who's earning 1.6, where do you think she will get the money to pay up for a loan of 300,000? So we are against loans. The government must just take a decisive decision to introduce state-funded education for all of us.
Phakamile, do you agree with everything that has been said?
Absolutely. As the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, in our December Congress, which took place last year, one of the things we reaffirmed was that it was important for the movement to back the students' struggle. Ultimately, these students are students of the working class. It's their parents that we represent. It's their parents who are struggling on the meager salaries that they're earning as a result of the brutality and the selfishness and the greed of the capitalist system that Katlego so aptly described a minute ago. How on earth do you expect members of the working class, who are now in line, with government's proposal of 20 Rand per hour, supposed to access quality higher education at such a ridiculously low wage of 20 Rand per hour? And then government's solution is a loan system. And what we're opposed to as NUMSA, first of all, is that we believe that what loans do is it's a form of slavery that is created through indebtedness. So the student then, fine, you get the loan, you study, but the moment you graduate with the burden of a debt of however many hundreds of thousands that you must now pay back on your meager earnings of 20 Rand per hour. Secondly, we're opposed to this system because if you look at what has been proposed at the moment through the Fees Commission in terms of its recommendations, they are saying, for example, that students who go to TVET colleges should get access to a sort of 100% subsidy. And then those who go to your more lily-white institutions, your universities, your WITS universities, your UCTs must access a loan. Now the problem we have with that is it creates a two-tier system where the children of members of the working class again are relegated to colleges which are under-resourced and underfunded. We all know that TVET colleges in this country do not get the same resources as your WITS universities, as your UCTs. So the children who come from those institutions are not actually equipped at the same level as those who come from these lily-white institutions. And again, it's your more well-off students whose parents earning more, who get access to loans which give them access to better educational facilities which are better funded. So what have we achieved here with this announcement? We've achieved nothing for members of the working class. What we've done is we've basically cursed them to a life of indebtedness, and we've cursed those who cannot afford to an inferior quality of education. And we can't really say that this government can celebrate this. This is not something that members of the working class should be celebrating.
And just earlier on in the year, we had a representatives from NSFAS, and they were talking about how, the whole system of repaying your loan after you've been given the loan, it makes sure that the ones who have passed the grades can now be responsible for others who come up. So it's just propagating a culture of taking care of one another. What is your, I see the rigorous head shake there from Katlego. Katlego, what is your opinion on that?
I think one thing that we must make clear as students is that even if they say that we are paying 3 cents a month, we are against the initiative of loans. And we are saying that the government must be decisive in terms of deciding on which economic system to use. Because now we are faced with a situation wherein you'll have Rupert's, Gupta's, Cyril Ramaphosa's, and others, and Budutizile Zuma, who are actually exploiting the economy. And now you will also have the poor people who are demanding services from government. So where do we expect government to get the money? We are providing solutions for them since they are failing to provide. They must nationalize all the mines. They must take over all strategic means of production so that they can be able to fund free education. We are not only concerned about free education. We are saying the health facilities that our people get from the government are very poor and they must be enhanced. The only way they can be enhanced is through government having enough money to fund these health facilities. And the only way they can get them is to nationalize all the strategic means of production. So we are against loans. Even if it's 3 cents per month, we don't want it.
All right. And going back to the issue of TVET colleges today, this year's budget vote speech was all about that, and they said that, you know, they need to change and the infrastructure of the TVET colleges and the overall administration so that we can have a lot of people moving into TVET colleges. What is your opinion now on the TVET colleges? Should we be having TVET colleges, and should we be working on them to perfect them so that we can have other black students going in there instead of going to the universities?
I think, you know, the problem with the TVET colleges is one of the fact that historically these are colleges that have always been neglected. Even under apartheid, they were neglected. And that is why the quality of education, comparably speaking, is not the same. The child who goes to a TVET college does not have access to resources, does not have access, for example, to a proper lab with proper equipment, with proper learning facilities, with highly skilled lecturers, compared to a child who goes to your Wits University, your UCTs, etc. And the problem we see as NUMSA is that we see a continuation of this inequality that was perpetuated under apartheid, continuing even in post-apartheid. You cannot tell me that you are equalizing the state when a child of Oppenheimer, with his or her resources, and a child of a domestic worker, and you take the same budget and you split it equally amongst those two, and then you say that you are creating equality. It's just not possible. The one who's a child of a domestic worker already is severely disadvantaged by virtue of their position and class in society. And if you're not dealing with that class issue, then you're failing in addressing the problem of inequality. We believe very strongly in the fact that the best way that this government can fund and equalize real radical economic transformation will come from nationalizing the banks, will come from nationalizing the mines, so that those minerals are actually used for the benefit and for the use of the working class majority in South Africa. It will come when the land has been nationalized. So until you take those radical steps to transform the economy in the interest of the working class and not in the interest of white monopoly capital and capitalism, then that's the only time we're going to see this genuine equalization of society taking place.
All right. And there's another comment that we had from someone who was on the show earlier on, and earlier on in the year, of course, and we were talking about education and free education, and this is what the person had to say. They said free education will mean nothing to us if we are still going to be unemployed graduates. So comes the question now of which should we prioritize, the education or the placement within the fields that the students studied for? Should it be a question of prioritizing, or can we do all these at the same time?
I think there's only one solution to this problem, comrades. What must happen is that we must never ever reduce the revolution of economic emancipation to free education. We are saying that government must not come to us with an initiative of prioritizing issues. They must just say, from now on, there is no... Who's that man who's having shares in the Reserve Bank? He's not even... Yeah, those people. There is no Pravin Gordhan who will have shares in the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank will be owned by the state. And then we start now to say we are funding free education. After graduating, the economy will be fine because it will be owned by you. You will then be able to be absorbed by the very same economy that took you to school. So we are rejecting that proposal. Whoever came with that proposal of prioritizing is actually trying to confuse us, like government is doing. That they know that if they can say there is subsidy for TVET students will now say that we are fine. And then we'll have students in TUT saying that no, government is giving us loans. So they are trying to actually dilute the revolution of free education, of which is something that we are not accepting. Come January, we are all going to ensure that there is no university that operates until government responds to this need.
I think I must support what Comrade Katlego is saying, because he's absolutely correct. We shouldn't allow ourselves to get bogged down in these kinds of discussions, because it's not even a choice. If you make a decision to pursue that kind of radical economic transformation where, for example, the state owns the means of production, then you've answered many questions automatically without even having to go very far. It is about a change in the course that the government has chosen. This government has chosen to embrace white monopoly capital. It has chosen to embrace a neoliberal economic agenda. It has abandoned the Freedom Charter, which was a basic roadmap for socialism at that time in the 1950s. And it's done so in order to please ratings agencies, in order to please your World Banks, in order to please your IMFs. Anybody does any basic research on these institutions will know that these institutions do not have a developmental agenda. They're not interested in empowering the majority of workers. Their ideology, their purpose it's based on exploitation of the working class for the benefit of investors, for the benefit of capitalists. And this is what we are vehemently opposed to as NUMSA. We are saying that for the very things that this government is saying it wants to do, there is only one solution, and that is a radical socialist agenda. Anything short of that is a fake revolution. It will never amount to anything radical. It will never amount to anything genuine. It will never amount into anything tangible for the majority of the working class in this country.
All right, this is TUT Network with Leo Sekoere. I am with Phakamile Hlubi, the National Acting Spokesperson of NUMSA, and as well SRC President Katlego Makyobola. We're going to take a short break in opening the lines. Please, if you want to take part in this discussion, the number to dial is 012-799-257. Talk to us. What is your opinion on all of this that you have heard? Do you have something to agree with, to disagree with? Yes, you can call us on that number, 012-799-257. Let's take a break and we'll be back after this. SRC President Katlego Makyobola, and we're talking all things education and everything that's happening in and around our education spheres. So welcome back, guys. Before the break, one thing that we promised to talk about is the decolonization of education. See, a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of students that are listening still have not grasped what it is that we're referring to when we talk about decolonizing our education, and why is it so important that we decolonize our education. Can you please shed a little bit of light on that?
Okay, when we say that we want decolonized education, we are not just saying fancy word, but we are saying that we want a curriculum with content that is relevant to the socio-economic status of our country. We are having more people, we are having more poor people, in fact, in the country than the rich. So why do train people to ensure that there is sustainability amongst the rich and leave out the poor. We've got the likes of the governor of the Reserve Bank, the likes of Cyril Ramaphosa, a lot of people who are products of this colonized education system, and they were trained to be job seekers rather than job producers. So we are saying our economy must produce job creators and people who will be able to challenge this capitalist economic system and eventually change it so that it can favor our poor people. That's all we are saying about this education.
Okay. Looking at the way we run things here in our education department, do you think that we do have the capacity to make that hectic change, that huge change?
Yes, we can do it. One thing that we should agree on as the poor is that the revolution is about change, and change is pain. So we must be able and be ready for pain so that maybe the future generation can be liberated from exploitation and suppression. So anything is possible. We'll get assistance from countries like Cuba and Russia, like they've assisted us during the apartheid regime. I'm sure they will be very much happy to hear us saying that we want to introduce a socialistic or a communist economic system that will accommodate the poor people and ensure that the basic needs of our poor people are met. So it's possible.
Do you agree, Phakamile?
Well, I mean, what Comrade Katlego was talking about is true in the sense that if you look at it, for example, at the role of the Reserve Bank, excuse me, the Reserve Bank's role is very narrow. They chase inflation, for starters. It's very focused on inflation targeting. And historically, ever since 1994, the role of the Reserve Bank is to protect white wealth. As NUMSA, we believe that it should be nationalized, it should be state-run, it should be run for the benefit of this country, it should be run with a developmental agenda, and it should have a job-led strategy, not a strategy where it focuses on inflation and inflation targeting. And one of the things must change is that we need to do more to build our manufacturing capacity and our industrialization capacity in this country. We've actually destroyed our manufacturing capacity by allowing the Chinese to flood our markets with their cheap goods. And what we need is definitely an economy that protects manufacturing, because if you protect manufacturing, you are actually building jobs. It means that factories can mushroom. It means that members of the working class have real job opportunities, that they'll be able to actually earn an income and be able to raise their families in a dignified and a decent way. The situation we have at the moment is not ideal, because it's really what our government has done is they've chased neoliberal economic policies which really have been very detrimental to the poor and the working class in this country. And that must end if we're going to see any kind of real change in the economy.
Speaking of changes in the economy, another thing that has been brought up along with our education debates is the issue of artisans. Do you support the notion that our young people should go and get artisan training?
Yes, absolutely. Most of our members, in fact, fall in that bracket of artisans, especially in engineering and in the auto sector. There's a huge demand for skilled artisans in that space, and that is one of the disservices of the educational department in this country. Is there's really not been enough focus on training artisans. We've got a shortage of plumbers. We've got a shortage of electricians. We're busy encouraging people to access university education when really they could create jobs for themselves working in these spaces where we need these skills. So we would definitely make a call for that. But at the same time, while you're making that kind of call, it's very important that we don't allow a situation where capital is allowed to exploit the working class. Because what we have in South Africa at the moment, particularly with the introduction of this 20 Rand minimum wage, is you're going to have a situation where young people go and train at colleges to become artisans, to become electricians, only to be hired by capital at a rate of 20 Rand per hour, where they're exploited by earning low wages when they're actually skilled, you know. It's really an insult that our government would even promote such a low national minimum wage instead of fighting more for a living wage, a kind of wage where members of the working class can actually raise their families with dignity, so that they can actually pull them out of poverty.
And that's why we have unions such as NUMSA to fight for such things. And you know, speaking of NUMSA fighting, you have not been silent when it comes to the struggles of the youth in especially higher education and training. So what are some of the things that you have done, since you've said that you've pledged support to the Fees Must Fall movement? What are some of the actions that you have taken to show this kind of support?
Well, the NUMSA Youth Forum was very involved in, particularly with the case of Comrade Nkosi Kanyile of Durban University of Technology. It's common knowledge, of course, that the EFF did a lot of work in supporting him with his court case. Where NUMSA was involved was in terms of mobilizing young workers to be sensitive to what was going on in the case of this young man. We also mobilized students and funded their transport to the Magistrates Court in Durban. We also rallied behind him and assisted him at the Constitutional Court. Some of our members were actually there to support him. Basically, what we see our role in terms of the students' battle, we do not want to drive this agenda. The students must be the ones to drive this agenda. What we believe we can assist with as NUMSA is more in terms of support. Like, for example, what I've just described in the case of Nkosi Kanyile. We were not the ones who were driving the marches for Fees Must Fall. We shouldn't be the ones to do that because we are workers. It was the students who were driving this campaign, and ultimately they must be the ones to lead it. How we can help is because of our vast experience in demonstrating and protesting. So we can assist with logistical things like what we did in the case of Comrade Nkosi. We can assist with transportation. We can assist with, if there's a mass march, for example, with things like marshals. But it is not for us to drive that agenda. One of the things we can also do is mobilize the parents of the students, those who are workers, to say, support your student who is fighting for free education because they're fighting on your behalf. When the students are mobilizing, and in fact, I'm really interested in what Sasko has said now, where they're proposing a national shutdown next year. And I think this is something that as NUMSA we must debate for next year in preparation, is that what will our role be in relation to the national shutdown? Are we going to, for example, call on members of the working class to support the shutdown by also staying away from work to support the students? Those are some of the things that we have to do, because this is a life and death battle, not just for the students, but for their parents as well. They are struggling. They are suffering at the hands of capital just so that they can get their children access to quality education. So really, as a trade union, we have a duty to support this cause in every way that we can.
Looking at the whole campaign of Fees Must Fall, are there things that you feel that need to be restructured or done in a better way? Or would you say that this is a perfectly whole movement?
Okay, one thing that I would like to discourage the students from doing when they embark on this revolution of free education is the burning down of our properties, particularly our residences and our libraries. Comrades, we must agree that universities are not going to offer us anything. Universities are just a third party that does not play an important role in the decision-making process of us getting free education. So we are saying we are just going to let them know that we are going to embark on revolution. and the fight is between us and government. That it's high time that government takes us serious. And I'm glad that the spokesperson of NUMSA brought aspects of the Russian Revolution. I'm sure you are aware that the revolution was started by peasants who were complaining about the price of bread, and later they were joined by the workers. So we are saying that we are going to start a revolution. We expect all workers to put their tools down and say that we are also affected, because we are the ones who are going to suffer when these fees are increased. We also expect POPCO to make an announcement that their police must not be the ones to come and shoot us in January, because I was very disappointed in January. During registrations and applications, we had policemen who were shooting us last year, coming to us saying that go and negotiate for my child so that she can be registered. And I said, but you were shooting us last year, so now you want our assistance. So we are expecting all the trade unions, civil society organizations, interest groups to actually assist us in pressurizing government to actually do what is right, because we don't deserve loans, we deserve free education.
And we do have a comment from Katlego. Katlego, where have you been the whole night? Okay, Katlego says, my take is free education is possible. SA has the resources. The problem is that our resources are being misused by those we have entrusted. Decolonizing education is very important. Our curriculum needs to address the issues at heart, which is encouraging young black students to see themselves as employers, active participants in growing our economy the African way, by Africans and for Africans. Truth be told, no one understands ourselves better than ourselves. Any comment on what Katlego just said?
I think he's absolutely right. You know, the battle for education is not just about free quality education, it's about decolonized education, the kind of education that's going to assist us to actually meet the needs of the majority of people in this country. If we're going to transform our society, we must transform our educational system in our interest. I know it sounds like I keep repeating myself, but I am. It's very deliberate, because I want this message to come through and to get through to every person who's listening, that it is time for members of the working class to demand more than what has been offered to them. What we've been offered up until this point is crumbs. What we need now is to demand for a society that is going to operate in our interest. We must control the economy. We must control the government. We must have policies which are designed for our benefit, not for the benefit of our bosses. So really, it's for members of the working class to have that mental shift where they realize that it is possible. I mean, right now we're talking about how this government claims that they don't have the resources to fund free education. But hang on, we're busy talking about trillions that may or may not have been set aside for the nuclear deal. Now the question we have to ask ourselves is, if we've got money to fund the nuclear deal, why do we not have money to fund free education in our lifetime? And really what this speaks to is the priorities of this government. This government is not interested in furthering the agenda of the working class. Because if it was, the announcement today would have been free education for everybody. That's what the announcement would have been, not more loans.
And also looking at the definition according to the commission report of free education, they said that, well, free education is more than what your normal person at home thinks it is. It's all about the expenses that you're going to incur during your studies at school. What is your take on that? Free education, should it be like the whole amount of your your health bills, your recreational money, your transport and your books, or should it be just about tuition?
You see, that's the problem with this discussion, is that it's been very narrow, and again, Comrade Katlego alluded to this earlier about the fact that we cannot talk about the revolution of the working class in terms of free education. We're talking about the whole system must be a revolution means a radical transformation of an entire system. We want a system that is going to allow us to provide free quality education for all working class children. What does that mean? That means we have to nationalize the mines. Because how are we going to pay for this education? It means we have to nationalize the mines, the banks, the land, right? So that we actually have the resources to pay for this education, to pay for this quality health care that the students must be able to access and their parents. Do you see that everything must feed into each other? I mean, those who claim that this is a pipe dream are lying. You've got clear examples. I mean, even if you just look at social democratic countries, for example, like Scandinavian countries like Norway. Norway has nationalized its oil reserves. There's a state-owned company called Statoil, which owns 50% of all its oil reserves. They're a nation which pays some of the highest taxes in the world. But with the money that they make, they can pay for free education. Cuba, which, by the way, has been vilified by many capitalists for being a communist country, is probably one of the poorer nations. It's certainly poorer than South Africa in terms of resources. They don't have the same level of mineral resources that we have. But Cuba, the standard of living in Cuba is higher than any other country in the world. It even supersedes the United States. Its health care is better than what they offer. Quality, free, universal health care. Something America has failed to do. They offer quality, free education. Something that America has failed to do. America, which is the super capitalist country of the world. You know, people can mock communism as much as they want, but the fact of the matter is you have a shining example in the form of Cuba that communism works if you are interested in making it work. If you have the interest of the working class at heart, it can work. And I think as a country, we should just be bold. We should not be ashamed of pursuing this agenda. We should stop listening to ratings agencies and white monopoly capital, and we should start acting in the interest of the majority of people, the same people, I might add, who are actually responsible for the liberation and for the end of apartheid in this country.
All right. Unfortunately, we have come just to the end of this part of the show, but producer will give us 10 minutes now for your motivation. Just a few seconds just to close off. In closing, Katlego, what would you like to say to everyone who's listening, the students and the prospective students?
Okay, comrades, our call is very precise and concise that we are demanding. We've been begging for long, man. Our parents have begged, our brothers have begged. Now it's us who must beg again, but we are not ready to beg. We are saying we are demanding free education, and if government is not going to give us free education, we are going to force them to give us free education. And I'm glad that she touched on countries that are excelling in terms of providing free education. And one of the lessons